All right, what is the song that is currently stuck in your head right now? I'll go first. It's Hey, hey, you, je n'aime pas ta copine, no way, t'as besoin de nouvelles. Sometimes we all just need a little Avril Lavigne in our lives, but hey guys, thanks for coming back to check out another video. So we are here today. I am hoping that I can save you from making the same poor, horrible decisions that I have made in the past. When I was doing my eyeshadow palette collection video and I swatched out all of my palettes, I really had a long talk with myself like, Haley, honey, what are you doing with your life? You got palettes that are like complete and utter dupes of each other. Like, you don't need multiple palettes like that. So I decided to sit down, take a good look, re-swatch out everything, and really decide, like, do these palettes have a place in my collection? Like, can they both survive? And the short and long of it is no, not every palette. I don't need every one of these palettes. So I have found good homes for the ones that I want to declutter, but I thought it would be an interesting video to share with you guys in case maybe you happen to own one of the palettes that I own and you've had your eye on like what I consider to be the dupe palette. Don't make my same mistakes. Like, hopefully this helps you. Or if you've like been pining and wanting both of the palettes, maybe this video will help you make a more clear-cut decision. I don't know. I just thought it would be fun to sit down and film this. So we're not going to ramble any further. I do have 8 palettes to talk to you about. 6 of them I feel like are actually complete and utter dupes. The first 2 we will talk about, I feel like are more along the like honorable mention side. They're not complete and utter dupes. However, the formulas are quite different, and the shades that are always like my eye is always drawn to, I have represented in both palettes. So the 2 that I'm referring to is the Ace Beaute, I think is how you say it, Vintage Dawn palette, and the Juvia's Place Saharan palette. Now, if you're familiar with these and I open them up, these are also, side note, the only 2 palettes that I didn't like actually swatch out in a clip for you guys. So if you're familiar with this, this is what the Ace Beaute Vintage Dawn palette looks like. You guys know I'm all about like the grunginess, and I love that. So that is why I picked up this palette. However, the formula of this I am not thrilled with, and I hear a lot of people rave about this company's formula. I think part of it might be, I feel like I see a lot of people have the Scarlet Dusk palette over this palette. And these darker, like more grungy shades, I know are harder to formulate, so I think that's part of it. The shades, the matte shades in here just feel super scratchy. Like I can't get behind using them. It's just, it just doesn't feel good. And then the shimmer shades are fine. Like they're not bad. They're not my favorite. You know what I mean? There's nothing inherently wrong with the shimmer shades. I'm going to be upfront with you, but they're just not my favorite, and I can't really place my finger on it exactly. So then if we open up the Saharan palette, again, you're going to look at me and think like, Haley, you're crazy. Like, these look nothing alike. But I'm going to quickly swatch out the shades that catch my eye the most within this Vintage Dawn palette, because this is the one that's going to be leaving my collection. All of the shades in here that I absolutely love, that I find eye-catching, I have in this palette. All right, so here are some shades swatched out. So let me quickly tell you. So this first shade right here is Inman from the Saharan palette, and this is the shade Dew from the Vintage Dawn palette. So you can see, like, those are almost spot on. Now that Dew shade does have a little bit more of like an icy blue kind of shift to it, but they give you the exact same effect on the eyes. And that Dew shade from this Vintage Dawn palette, I would say is my favorite shade within the palette, but I forget about it. When I want that kind of like icy white blue shade, I always think of my Saharan palette first. So I reach for that Inman shade far more often than I do the Dew shade. All right, these next 2, this first one is also from the Saharan palette. This is the Wodabi shade. Now, side note, my Wodabi shade is not actually Wodabi. It is a ColourPop single Carrot Cake. But I feel like Carrot Cake and Wodabi really do look similar. So I feel like if you own the actual Saharan palette, your Wodabi shade will be just as similar as this. The last golden shade over here is Sun from the Vintage Dawn palette. Now, obviously, Carrot Cake is a little bit darker and more of like a deeper gold, and Sun is more of like a lighter gold. But at the end of the day, on your eyelids, if you're using this as your lid shimmer shade, it gives you the same kind of look. Okay, so down here, this first one, this very dark brown, is Pyramid from the Vintage Dawn palette. And then next to it is Katsina from the Juvia's Place palette. And I know these look super different. This one is obviously more red, but in person, Katsina does have, it's more cool tone, but to me it has like a little bit of a red hint to it. And when I'm looking at these two together, I would prefer Katsina as far as like a kind of red brown shade goes, because I feel like it's easier to work with and blend out edges and just do some really nice crease work with, rather than this Pyramid shade. And then the last two that I have swatched out, so this first one is the Shanghai shade. What is this shade called from the Saharan? Senegal shade, I think is how you say it, is right here. And then this one is Golden Hour from Vintage Dawn. So again, they're really different. In person, the shade from the Saharan palette, I feel like while it is a bronzy shade, it does have some red to it. And you guys know, red shimmers are not like my favorite. I'm still a little uncomfortable with those. We're working through it. But I would prefer to have a more like bronzy kind of red shimmer, or just a matte red shade to work with. So even though right off the gate, these don't look all that similar, I feel like the shades that I want to reach for out of the Vintage Dawn palette, I do have in the Saharan palette, and I don't like the formula of this. So I'm going to declutter this, pass this along, and I don't remember if I said it already, but all of these palettes that are leaving my collection, I do have a good home for. All right, so the next 6 palettes that we will talk about are more spot-on dupes, in my opinion. So the first one we will talk about is the Nubian palette, which I'm holding upside down, from Juvia's Place. This is a really gorgeous color story. I feel like this is a neutral lover's dream. It's got some really nice light shimmery pink shades, some really great grounding neutral matte shades, and it does go quite deep if you're into that, like if you really like that depth. So there is nothing wrong with this palette. I really enjoy this formula. I believe this was like their first palette they released, and in my opinion, they've only gotten better as far as like color story and things like that go. So this is a very pretty palette. I do highly recommend this. I think it's at a great price point for the formula. Like, it's just amazing what they can do. The dupe palette that I have to show you is the Natasha Denona Bronze palette. I think that as far as looking at these palettes, now the bronze palette does have these like, it has like this kind of blue, interesting shimmer shade to it, rhodium, however you say that. So there's that difference in it. And there's also more shades in the bronze palette, if I'm not mistaken. But when you're looking at them, they are the exact same in my opinion. I feel like if I didn't tell you which one was which swatched out, you would have a hard time guessing. So I really like the formula of this, the Natasha Denona. I get the hype behind it now. However, I understand like it's pricey. It is pricey makeup, and you really, at the end of the day, do we need any of it at the end of the day? Probably not. But I would rather tell you guys to save your money and just get the Nubian palette, because while the formula of this is nice, the bronze palette is nothing like new and exciting and revolutionary. So this is the one that I am going to keep in my collection though, because it did cost more money. But like I said, if I knew now what I knew then I wouldn't have purchased this, and I would have just kept loving on the Nubian palettes though. But yeah, this one will be leaving my collection, and I know you guys have seen me declutter this before, but I promise you it has a good home to go to now. All right, let's talk about another Juvia's Place palette. I have the Warrior palette. So I really love this, and I feel like this palette gets maybe passed over a little bit. I do think there is a specific market for it. So I think you have to be, one, a neutral lover, and two, a like golden honey eyeshadow type lover. However, for a 9-pan palette accomplishing that color story, I think this is so well thought out. There's only 3 matte shades in here, but the 3 matte shades are so necessary, in my opinion, to this color story. So you have your matte cream shade, which comes in so much handy trying to like blend out the edges of darker matte shades. You have this really nice like mid-tone brown transition color, and then a nice dark chocolate color to deepen out any look. I feel like too, the variety of the shimmers that you get in here give you enough to work with to where you can actually create a multitude of different looks using this palette. So as far as like a 9-pan color story goes, this is so well thought out of. And again, I really love the Juvia's Place formula, so I do enjoy this palette. The dupe palette that I have in my collection is the Urban Decay Naked Honey palette. Now, of course, the Naked Honey has more shades to it, and I feel like it has more, it's got a more fleshed out matte range to it, where you obviously have more mattes, and there's more of those like mid-tone mattes and mustard mattes. However, while the formula of the Naked Honey is better than the other Naked palettes, in my opinion, I still don't really like the Urban Decay Naked formula. That's just something that I have found out. I much prefer the Juvia's Place formula. 2, when I am looking at this palette, since there are more shades to it, this palette almost feels more monochromatic to me than the Juvia's Place palette. And I think it's because when you're looking at it, a lot of these shades just start to look really similar, repetitive, and almost unnecessary. So I'm a little overwhelmed when I pull out the Naked Honey palette to look at it and try to create a look. And I don't feel that same way when I pull out the Juvia's Place, the Warrior palette. So for that reason, I'm going to keep the Warrior palette in my collection and declutter the Naked Honey palette. All right, the last 2 that we have to talk about. The first one is the Persona Identity palette. Now, I know they've updated the packaging to this, so now it comes in that like plastic white packaging that matches the Identity too, but I have the old packaging. Anyway, it doesn't change. They didn't change the formula as far as I know. This is my favorite cool toned palette that I own, and I don't own a lot of cool tone palettes. And I don't want to. I don't wear cool tones enough to justify more than having one palette, in my opinion. So this one is my favorite. And I know it has some warmer shades in here, like the matte red Audacious shade. And then the like mid-tone brown Charming shade, I would say lean more warm tone. And the shimmer shade Goddess in here also leans a bit more warm tone, but predominantly this is a cool tone palette. The shimmer formula of Persona, it's just, I can't rave about it enough. The shimmers look like they are just foiled on your eyelids. You don't have to do any extra work to them. And the matte shades in here are really nice, especially their darker matte shades, like this shade Chic, which is like a nice like purple matte shade. I really don't have any issues trying to blend out and work with this shade. And I feel like that's impressive because a lot of times darker shades, especially darker purples, are harder to like formulate and work with. But I have honestly no complaints about this palette. I just love it so much. If you caught my like 5 palettes that I want but low-key already own, I wanted the Natasha Denona Glam palette, but every time I have wanted that, I reach for this cool toned Persona palette and it satisfies that urge. So I can't highly recommend this enough. And so by giving it all those praises, you probably know right off the bat that the dupe palette that I'm going to talk about is the one I'm decluttering. But it is the Urban Decay Naked 2, you guys. Like, I feel a little bad saying this, but again, just like what I mentioned with the honey, even though the honey palette has a better formula in my opinion, I just don't like the Urban Decay Naked formula. So let's talk about this palette. There's that. 2, this has more colors, doesn't it? I think it does. It has more shades. I really should have like done the math before I sat down to film this. Either way, it has more shades, and the variety of shades is different than what you're finding in the Persona palette. Like the Naked 2 definitely has some more like golden shades. It does have like a pinky red shade Chopper, which is a shimmer. And this palette goes dark just like the Persona palette, but this one goes dark in a much different way, in my opinion. So the Persona palette has like a dark brown, a dark red, a dark purple. It has more variety with those darker shades, whereas the Naked 2, it goes dark, but in a more purple way, and that's it. Also, I don't like that the Naked 2 does not have as many shimmers. I feel like the shimmers that are included in this palette, you're getting Foxy, which is like this very pale yellow shade. And then Booty Call is more of a satin in my opinion, but I guess it could work like a matte. It's just like a satin cream shade. And then you've got Tease, which is like a mid-toned, cool tone purple shade. And then you've got a black shade, Blackout. So honestly, it is really hard for me to come to this palette and want to create a look with it just because of the matte shades that they've included in this palette. Another thing, I used to only own this palette way back in the day, early on in my makeup journey, and I did really love it. But now that I have grown and experienced other and better formulas, I just don't like this palette. And so when I bought this, it was half off, it was on sale, they had taken it away a time or two, and so it was very much a nostalgia purchase. And I wish I could go back in time and talk Haley out of that because it was just unnecessary. So I am going to technically declutter this from my collection. Like I said, this palette holds a lot of nostalgia for me because it's not this exact palette, but the one I had previously, I had panned a bunch of shades out of it and things like that. So I'm going to put this into like a makeup like memory box kind of thing. I know some of you might think that's silly, but while I don't want to reach for this, I struggle to reach for this palette. I can't part with it. Like it's just sentimental in that sense. So technically leaving, but technically not leaving. All right, so out of the 8 palettes I showed you, let's just quickly recap. I do have 4 palettes leaving my collection. So I have the Urban Decay Naked 2 that will be leaving my collection. I have the Urban Decay Naked Honey that will be leaving my collection. The Nubian palette from Juvia's Place, and then the Ace Beaute Vintage Dawn palette. I feel really good about letting these palettes go. This has taught me a lot to where I really want to scrutinize color stories of eyeshadow palettes that catch my eye and make sure that what I am buying adds value and variety into my collection. So that's one thing I am going to work on. I hope that you found this video helpful. Again, if you've had your eye on one or both, maybe it helps you make that decision, or maybe if you own one and wanted the other, that you see like you don't need both of them, or maybe it just encourages you to also take that look in your collection, see what you have that are exact dupes, or really scrutinize, you know, any eyeshadow palette purchase that you may want in the future. So hopefully it was helpful. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I had a lot of fun like sitting down to film this, and yeah, I thank you so much for watching. I hope you're having a good day, a good night, a good whatever, and I will catch you in the next video. Bye.